everybody? How are we all doing today? I hope that everyone had an awesome but yet safe Thanksgiving and all that good stuff. Uh, you have a good Thanksgiving there, AJ?
I was all right, man. I just watched some terrible football. We got that terrible game between the Texans and Lions. That was awful. Just two terrible teams. And then also what was it? It was the Cowboys versus Redskins. Also a terrible matchup. But because it was so bad, I really enjoyed it.
I hear you. It's almost like when something is so genuinely bad, despite it trying so hard to be good, it's so entertaining. It's not like those Maki films where it's obviously bad. There's a certain there's a certain interest. There's a certain interest.
Absolutely. The NFC East is like watching a car wreck in slow motion every weekend, and I love it. It's my favorite thing in sports right now. Is just anytime there's a matchup between two NFC East teams, I have to watch it. It's just pure mayhem.
You know what? Real quick, I want to get this on air for the folks in Fargo Moorhead to hear. Uh, I still think that the reason that the Eagles are having a bad year and Carson Wentz isn't having a good year is because the Eagles have a bunch of people that could probably be found in a Walmart parking lot playing for them at this point, and they have a front office that I think could be ran better, probably by me and you, AJ. I think that we could figure it out better than what they managed to do. I mean, not really, but some weeks, damn, it looks like that.
It's just
So, by the way, if there's any Eagles fans listening, I just want to say a personal thank you for the what has turned in to be one of the biggest upsides of 2020 with everything getting canceled. Thank you for passing on Justin Jefferson. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, uh, the other thing that I want to talk about that I'm sure a lot of people in the Fargo, Moorhead, and surrounding areas are really sick of hearing, much like saying that Carson Wentz is a blah blah blah. I don't even say the words. It's sacrilege. Uh, but is the issue on GMOs? I was reading an article. A buddy of mine sent it to me, and it said that 88% of Americans. Now, granted, this was from 2016. Yeah. But 88, almost 90% of Americans believe that GMOs ought to be regulated and displayed on the package if it is or isn't a GMO product. All right. So the labeling says, hey, this was genetically modified. Ooh. All right, AJ, what are your thoughts?
I'm a big proponent of GMOs. I think that if you're someone that cares about the environment, if you care about people, it's pretty hard to say that GMOs are bad for either of those. GMOs make it so that way we can use less of the environment in order to be able to feed the population, and GMOs allow for more people to have food. You know, there's no health downside that's been demonstrated by decades of research, and there are some legitimate issues to have with GMOs, but I think that the pros of feeding people more nutritious food, and using less land and resources for that food. I mean, those are so large of pros. You know what I mean?
It is really, really unreal. And the other thing, too, and it's important when you're talking about GMOs. Uh, and by the way, folks, there have been polls from whatever, and it has ranged from 82% to 92%. So you're really talking about like a overwhelming majority of people here, right? And the big thing about GMOs too that you said about it, it's similar to how I've kind of viewed the war on vaping or the war on marijuana and keeping it out of medicinal hands. Uh, this just isn't a risk, you know. It's, in my opinion, I mean, and here's the big thing, right? It's the required labeling that's an issue, right? But the really what blows my mind is that, for example, we would both agree that to a certain extent that there should be some type of regulations or warnings or blah blah blah, best practices in general on like toxic substances, right? Ammonia, bleach, hey, don't mix them, stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. That's all completely normal to stop people from hurting themselves.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is imagine it's just so ludicrous that there, because what it kind of turns into, based on the science, is that there's a bias there, right? There's a bias behind this feeling. It's we're having I mean, and we've certainly had the last, like, I'd say decade or so. We've had with the rise of the hipster comes the rise of the all organic whatever, you know what I mean? Uh,
Yeah. Don't get me started on Whole Foods, man. I can't afford like a single grape at Whole Foods.
I know a duck that runs a lemonade stand that may be able to help you with that. But anyway,
That's a good one. Deep
I
cut.
try. I try. But it's just so extraordinary, and it goes against the very basis of, like, for in this example, what the laws on labeling were intended to do, right? Because instead of alerting customers to a potential fraud or a potential risk, it's almost like I mean, just because it's different doesn't necessarily, put that in quotation marks, different doesn't mean that it's actually different. You know what I mean? Uh,
Yeah, so if I could, I have a really good example. I was just reading an article about this a week or two ago, and this is backed up by science. So, you know what food has had a crazy comeback like the past couple of years? Brussels sprouts, right? You've seen Brussels sprouts everywhere. Remember back when we were kids, you did not see Brussels sprouts anywhere. Nobody ate Brussels sprouts, nothing, right? You go
mm-hmm.
to like fancy restaurants or you go to even like the Cheesecake Factory and you can get Brussels sprouts as side dishes. People are steaming Brussels sprouts, people are frying them, baking them, whatever. Brussels sprouts have had the 2010s comeback of the decade is Brussels sprouts by far. But the question is why? Do you know why Brussels sprouts made a comeback? Is it just that we cooked it better? What is it?
Tell me, AJ, please.
That's no problem, man. We genetically changed Brussels sprouts to taste better. That's it. Like we were able to genetically modify Brussels sprouts to taste better. And now look at what's happened. We have more dishes, a food that most people didn't use, never ate. You can now get it at the grocery store. So I live here in Texas. You can get stalks of Brussels sprouts, right?
Really?
I've never seen them before. When I saw what a Brussels sprout, sorry, tough word there. When I saw what a Brussels sprout, don't edit that out, Duke, by the way. I think the listener will like it. When I
They
saw a
deserve
Brussels
it.
sprout stalk, it was the craziest thing because it's like a really thick, round tube surrounded by like the whole little nubs of the Brussels sprouts.
Oh,
It's just not something you see very often, especially because nobody really used to eat it, right? Nobody used to go Brussels sprout picking or wanting a whole stalk of Brussels sprouts.
that does
So,
sound like a weird sentence now that I think about
right.
it.
Exactly. However, it's made a comeback, and now people are buying Brussels sprouts all the time. That is a huge difference. I mean, to improve taste in food, right? There's cotton candy flavored grapes. How do y'all think that happened, right? Like we were able to genetically modify those grapes. We can crossbreed grapes. We can make sure that the tastes and flavors that we want by crossbreeding them. And in certain cases, we can also find out ways to change their DNA. We can
Right.
change human DNA. We can change plant DNA. That was decades ago. We figured out how to do that.
Are you telling me that these GMO cotton candy grapes weren't, in fact, grown by a bunch of clowns hiding on the Italian peninsula from the after effects of the Napoleonic Wars in secrecy?
That's a pretty detailed package. I think the packaging says that. Yeah, it doesn't include the battles, but it does include the Napoleonic War references. So I believe packaging. The
Right
packaging
on.
would never lie to me.
All right, I'm writing a letter or my congressman. So, and what I really want to expound upon here, if I may, for a second, other than to say, as a lot of y'all know, uh, the number one thing that I always comes back to me, and you always hear farmers say it. And if you're like a farmer right now, man, I salute you because this is not an easy time, and it hasn't been an easy time for a while for ag, relatively speaking, not to mention with the tariffs. But I just want to say, if the farmers themselves are willing to feed their family, and by extension, probably everyone they know indirectly with it, it's probably cool. You know, let me end it there. Let me end it there. What I want to go on about is that I think that this is a really good example of why not of why we need to really be careful about what things we get the government involved in, because just because a bunch of people think something should arbitrarily be regulated or labeled whatever, legislated, let's say, does not necessarily mean it's so. What are your thoughts on that, AJ?
I agree with that. I mean, you have to demonstrate in order to get the government involved. There needs to be a certain criteria, right? It's not just that the people want it to change, right? The government needs to find balance between safety, liberty, that type of stuff, right? So you have to demonstrate harm, and there's just no demonstratable harm by GMOs, by eating GMOs. If you could demonstrate harm, then you could say that you have a case, but there is no demonstrable harm. And as such, I don't really see the point with requiring it because, one, it's not easy to figure out what is and what isn't a GMO, sadly. It is 2020, and people that don't have nuanced understandings of GMOs won't understand, they think it's easy to draw the line. It's not. Like I said, I found the Brussels sprouts article I was talking about. NPR did it back in October 2019. Go ahead and check it out. So, uh, you know, when people think of GMOs, they think of like you're injecting like a plant seed or something with something to splice their DNA. That's not really the case.
Wait, as I understand it, don't they heat something up in a spoon before they stick it in the tomato? Is that
With a
how that works?
lighter. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's cotton involved somehow, but I've never really figured that out.
And so, it seems like an easy fix to people that are uneducated and terrified of it. But that's not the case. And like I said, you can't demonstrate harm. And that's obviously the first hurdle that you should jump to prove that the government has any sort of reason to get involved, right?
Absolutely. And I think that this is a cool thing because I mean that and you would hope that most people when you explain it to them, like if and I know that everyone has short attention spans, right? We've already covered that. Uh but if you could get people to sit down and like explain this to them, I think that that number drops dramatically. But boy, in our age, it is tough to get people to sit down and actually like, you know what I mean? It's so easy to get lost in the tabloid cover, man. Is a tabloid cover even relevant in the Instagram slide? I don't know. I
So
don't
I
even
was
think
going to
BuzzFeed's
say,
relevant.
I don't even think they're relevant anymore, but I would say that there's such a wealth of information out there, this podcast included, that it's really hard to be able to separate what is information. Our listeners, you can trust us. We try our best to be as accurate and present information as fully as possible. And what is active misinformation, right? Because there are people out there that they can be a doctor in something and be completely wrong in a different thing. You can be a doctor of physics and talk about how GMOs scare you, and then you can get a spot on a podcast that has hundreds of thousands of listeners and say that, and people may agree with you, So you have to really pick your information sources carefully, which is why we really appreciate all of our listeners here listening to the Horseshoe Theory and listening to two guys that are on opposite ends of the spectrum agree about something, because we'll disagree on something next.
That we will. Oh, it'll. Don't worry. It's kind of like you remember that game Slender that was based on Slender Man back in the day, one of those
Yes.
freemium games. it's kind of like when you're doing the dark version, you're never really sure where he's at, but it's going to be there. You know that. So while we're talking about things that might theoretically have either sound nice or have some type of support, uh, first off, I want to say that I think that the thing that we need to embrace in this country, and we're going to have a lot of disagreements over it shortly, spoiler perhaps, but is that if there's no harm, the government doesn't really, why. You know what I mean? Just a big WHY. Stop spending our money. Furthermore, stop spending your money to legislate legislators with things that, quite frankly, it literally doesn't make sense. It's quite literally. I can't even put it into words. So I want to expound upon that for a second is there's something else that's happened over the last let's call it 60 years. It's also seen an increase. AJ, are you familiar with occupational licensing?
Yes, I am relatively familiar.
All right. Well, for those of you that are not aware, occupational licensing is when the government, usually a state entity, but sometimes federal, local too, requires you to get a license, mate, so that you can go and operate a business or operate some type of whatever, based on a theory of like we need to protect consumers, we need to protect. It's always kind of vague. In the 1950s, there was let's call it 5% of the workforce needed an occupational license to do their job. By 2015, that number was about 22. So over 60 years, we've had 5 times, excuse me, 4 to 5 times, depending on how you slice it, of growth in jobs that require, or in percentage of the jobs that require occupational licensing. So, AJ, really quickly on just occupational licensing as a whole, what's your thoughts, bud?
So I understand the thought that that large of an increase in 5 decades is due to government overreach, but I would also argue that we need a more educated workforce for more things to do now. If it's really simple, you can generally, uh, you know, take that job to a different country. So a lot more things require occupational licensing. Another thing is in certain ways, the state needs to be able to hold people accountable for things, right? So I'm an engineer. So the most common example, right, is you need to become a professional engineer and you have a stamp and you stamp that, hey, I approve this drawing. I approve this and my license as an engineer is on the line here. I say that this is okay. Well, if you're stamping a bridge design and the bridge collapses, the company is held liable, but also you personally are held liable. And that's a way for the state to kind of, people can't cut corners because not only is their company at risk, but they are personally at risk. And I think it works pretty well because, like, we don't see bridges collapsing very often and stuff. But I can understand that for certain things, it's super big overreach because it doesn't really make sense to have a ridiculous amount of hours to prove that you can own a flower shop or something like that, right? Like that doesn't make sense to me. But I do think that in a lot of applications it makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm gonna. Ooh, I'm a. I want to stick out a little bit here. There's a couple of examples I want to bring up from the past few years that have gotten relevance. There's the fact that you need to get a new bill moving through the New York State. Had a great steak the other night, folks. The New York State Assembly and Senate would would have required August of 2020 shampoo assistants working in hair salons to complete a minimum of, all right, guess how many hours, AJ? Guess how many hours to shampoo someone's hair in the state of New
Probably
York?
probably like 5 weeks of training, so 200 hours.
More.
Ooh,
500 hours of a 1,000-hour course in cosmetology.
ooh, that's a lot.
There was a case in Louisiana. I don't know if you've heard about this case in Louisiana. This was the wacky one. It was there was a lawsuit brought by a lady because the she was running a she was a floral assistant and she was selling her flowers at weddings. Okay, cool. Unfortunately, do you know what the state of Louisiana has, AJ?
You have to get a license to design flowers. That's pretty crazy.
Boy, you do. And she took it to court. And you know what the judges said? Yeah, there is actually a risk to the public. I mean, they could poke their fingers. There could be dirt. This was all in the, like, I'm not making this up. This is me kind of
Hmm.
juxtaposed. Yeah. So, and I, and really, I think that it's kind of an embodiment of a larger problem because the occupational licensing, and the other thing that I want to mention about these two, right, is that occupational licensing is always one of a few things. First off, you're always going to affect poor people and people who are already working in otherwise safe industries or industries with a minimal requirement of harm or industries that might require 10 to 15 hours, maybe a day or two of training, perhaps, maybe a half day. I don't know. A shampoo assistant seems pretty straightforward. But in the first place, assuming that the businesses aren't going to do it themselves, which obviously, if you're going to hire someone to shampoo someone's hair, you'd hope that they're shampooing their hair. But it's this growing acceptance of government intervention. And the other thing that's interesting is, do you know who is often on the license boards?
It's people from the industry. They're
Yep,
gatekeepers.
industry experts. So
Yeah.
you have a bunch of people that had enough money to go and complain, to get a bill passed, to keep out their competition. I believe it was until not too recently you had to be a cosmetologist to braid hair in several states. Although I think that changed in a
So
number of states.
So I have an example of occupational licensing that I think is much too excessive, and I think it's going to be a hot take. So prepare yourself. I
That's
think
the
it's
cold
much too
water.
hard. I think it's much too hard to become a doctor in the United States.
I agree with you. There's a
It's
supply shortage.
completely way too hard.
Yep.
It makes zero sense to me how hard we make it to become a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
When we make it this hard to be a doctor, you're artificially limiting the pool, right? People don't want to do it. Your doctors want to keep it extremely hard to become a doctor because then they can get paid more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I completely agree with you that at that occupational licensing in a lot of areas is just so excessive, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't really understand. This is the kind of thing that happens when electorates aren't informed, and that speaks to a larger issue. Like you say that it's more and more people being okay with the government being more involved in their lives. I would say it's more people aren't informed about issues that actually affect them. And that's true for the large for including myself, 80-90% of people. State politics are not as fun to watch. Local city politics are not as fun to watch. Who wants to see two people argue about how much money they need to set aside to plow the roads? That's just not exciting,
That
right?
is true.
But that's the stuff that affects you every day. And but it's much more interesting to go out on Twitter and see the president talk about how the election is a fraud, which it's not. But that's the kind of stuff that's the kind of climate that we're in, right? And I just wish that people were more informed about those kind of excesses that don't make sense. And then I wish that people would be able to have better avenues to hold their elected officials accountable for things that don't make sense.
I
Unfortunately, we're not in control of what it takes to become a doctor. That's like an occupational board that's not certified by the state, as far as I know. I know that the state
I
basically
think that
says,
varies. I think that varies
yeah,
state by state.
it's
Or
it,
it's a
their state
complicated web of
medical
laws.
Yeah, states do have state medical boards that they need to pass, but most of the time it's just like a easy test that you do after residency, right? I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. Either way, it's just way too hard to become a doctor. It's way too hard to become a nurse. And I understand that people think we need to have the best and brightest doing those jobs, but we need people doing those jobs. you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. Especially as we're having a COVID crisis. Imagine if we had relaxed this 10 years ago and we had a whole new generation of doctors in the field. You know what I mean?
Well,
That would have been helpful.
yes, and also I think because it is so hard to become a doctor, like think about the hundreds of thousands of dollars that doctors take out in student loans. It's
Yep.
like it doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, if you affect the poor, a poor person sees that and is like, well, I can take out all those loans, I'll get paid a lot. Well, now I have to do some specialty that gets me paid a lot, and you don't see any family doctors. You don't see any doctors living in, unfortunately, sorry y'all, Fargo Moorhead. It's like, people, those doctors, they want to go live in big cities to spend all their big money, right?
Yeah, well, tell you
But
what, Fargo Moorhead's a heck of a lot better than, oh, I don't know. Let's just call it 50 miles north of Bismarck.
I agree completely. But Bozeman, Montana, for doctors, they get paid twice as much as like a doctor in the city, but they have to because that's how they're trying to attract doctors to like,
Mm-hmm.
Montana. This is an unfortunate reality of a system that for a lot of things makes it really hard to do what you want to do. And like I said, I think it makes sense. You don't want somebody just off the street coming in and like washing their hands, but they don't know how to wash their hands and sticking their hands into like your chest cavity, right? You know what I mean? Like I'm not advocating for that.
You
But
know,
at the same time, you have to look at a system and say, is it working?
yeah. I'll say this: if you trust people to touch your food and wash your hands while trusting your food at restaurants and takeout and all that stuff, yeah, you know what I mean. But what I like, there's a reason that even though there's theoretically hundreds of things that could go wrong in a restaurant, most servers don't have to pass a state certificate board. All right, come on. And what I want to bring up is you
you
mentioned
do
the
have to
system.
you do have to pass a state certificate board to serve alcohol
To
for
serve liquor,
server.
yes, yes,
Yeah,
you do. But
you need to be
there's
able to identify IDs
oh
and stuff.
yep, believe you me, I did it. I did it. I passed on the first try.
Yeah,
It's like
I've done it in like 4 states.
I'm
It's
almost
a
as
re-
it's something. But what I want to talk about related to that is that I think there's another issue that's right alongside this issue of over licensing, and that's over litigation.
oh
And this
man,
doesn't get talked about.
we are hitting all the libertarian talking points in this bit here, man. you are.
Yeah, I've got a, I'm on ballot PD. I'm going down most commonly referenced, but we have this huge issue where, and listen, all right, I want to say right out of the gate, you always hear about that unfortunate lady who spilled coffee on herself. That was actually reasonable. She did have a lawsuit.
Have
She
you seen
gladly
the
won.
burns? You saw the
No,
burns, right?
no, but
Just look up the burns.
I've heard enough, and it was obvious. Blah blah blah. I get that,
Just look
but
up the burns. Once I saw the burns and saw the skin grafts that she need to get, like that's what I bring up to people now. I'm just like, people make fun of him, like just look up the burns, and it's like not a joke. Yeah,
that that is absolutely true. And the other thing that's important here is that this has become such both a culturally and also institutional thing. Oddly enough, you can sue anyone for anything except maybe for a police officer for shooting you while you were reaching for your license that you told them about. Uh,
yeah, yeah.
anything
You can't
else?
sue police officers.
Well, you can, but there's that little thing.
Yeah.
Another libertarian talking, talking point: qualified immunity. But
You
let's
can
not get
sue
into
the
that.
departments. You can sue the police departments. You can't sue the individual officers.
That is true. But let's just
And
go on about, like, it's become such a money making scheme. And do you know what the problem is? what I see the problem as. And
Oh,
first off,
you want my take? A
yeah,
lab.
yeah.
Instead of a cab, it's a lab. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that still doesn't go as well in Mr. Brightside, though. And she's
But you were
calling
saying.
a lab. Here's the issue, and you have such a, and like a lot of the times, it's just, I mean, you hate to see them, but there are ambulance chasers out there, you know what I mean? God bless the public defendants in this country, because man, it's a lot more profitable to go into things like corporate law and all that other stuff. And this over litigation crisis, it, I just want to get that out of the way. But your thoughts first.
On over litigation
Yep.
about our court system, or like
You all right?
what's the question?
First,
Uh,
first
my
off, do you agree that there is an over litigation crisis? A lot of people would say no. Second off,
there is a culture that is very U.S. specific and U.S. unique of suing people. Yes.
we do have historical records of it. I do believe, from the 1800s. But all right, so you agree with it? I. So do you think that it's entirely? So we agree that there's a culture, right? We agree
Yes.
that that exists.
There is a culture of over litigation. 100%.
All right. So we've established. Look at that, folks. We met in the middle. Aha. But the other thing that I would like to ask you is, do you think that the answer is more of a? What do you think, if anything, is the answer to this cultural litigate, to this over litigation culture that we have, since we clearly
Oh,
have it?
I don't have a very like solid grasp of it because our legal system is so overwhelming. But if it was up to me, the over litigation culture, and how to solve over litigation is to create more equity in the court systems. Right now, the court systems are kind of designed to be confusing. They're designed to not make sense, and they're designed for the rich and powerful to get away with things. And
Yep.
so, the I don't know how to reform it, but if I was reforming it, the goals would be to make the legal system more equitable.
All right. Well, fortunately for the listeners, uh, I do have a political science degree, and believe me, I'm still an idiot. But if I may, I was taught by a very, very, very intelligent man. But he's such a high in esteem man that he probably doesn't want to be quoted by someone like me. So I'll just paraphrase here. But when it comes to over litigation, one of the things is it doesn't stop at the cultural level. I think that there's the first thing is that we really need to reevaluate what laws our Congress is passing. And we really need to reevaluate uh, why exactly they're getting involved with those. You know what I mean? We really need to. And the other thing that I think is big, other than actually, because the thing about over litigation is that it's one of those boring issues. You know what I mean? Like over litigation is like the plain chicken breast of the news, right? Like like you said, the court system is very, very overwhelming, and stuff related to it isn't exactly top of the list. You know what I mean? And that's a tough thing. But I think that, I mean, maybe something like us could help figure it out. But we need a way to actually have that conversation so that people are encouraged to know about it, so that people are encouraged to cover it more. You feel? And the other thing that I think we need to do, and I think we'll definitely agree on this one, and this is going to sound really weird coming from a libertarian, so check me out, folks. There's a reason I'm not all the way to the right on the political compass. And that is that I think what we need to do, firstly, is we need to increase funding for public defenders. And
Oh
secondly,
yes. Oh
we,
yes.
we need to increase access to diversion programs. There's no reason why we can't try you know what I mean? There's no reason why things like, and I'm not the biggest fan of like, do I think that drug courts are perfect? Do I think that, no. Do I think that we can do things to make them better no matter the state that you're in? Yes. Or the county, whatever that you're in? Yes. Do I think that they're better than sending someone to jail? Absolutely. The other huge key about this, too, is that we need to actually make sure, in addition to decreasing the overall supply, we need to increase the demand of public defenders while making sure that we're not just putting people in jail for anything, because that does two things, and they're both very important from an economical point of view. Okay, the first thing that it does is by increasing the, whether it be payment, whether it be decreasing the caseload, because there's a lot of people that are okay with theoretically being a public defender and maybe not making great money for a while they cut their teeth, right? That is a thing that exists. I will grant you that. But we need to make it easier to, like, pay your bills and your student loans and, like, actually get ahead for all the time that you put in to be a lawyer.
Yeah, and
Because,
they're also overworked.
yep, exactly, exactly. So by increasing more positions and paying them relatively speaking better, you get more on that end of it. The other thing is that you decrease the demand for public lawyers. And the thing about decreasing the demand for them is, imagine we have a system where we're at like some sort of equilibrium, where we have, relatively speaking, enough public defendants for a speedy whatever, and their numbers coming in haven't been that drastic. And because we're paying them more, relatively speaking, the maybe from savings of the other steps in the judicial system, who knows? Maybe by doing something on them, maybe by a local bond payment. I hope not.
Oh,
But
can I fit in my progressive talking point? What about defunding the police? I'm just kidding. We're not going to get into that today.
you saw those poll results too.
Yeah, that's a whole nother day.
Back next week, folks. But we can make it relatively, like, the reason fundamentally that it comes down to it is that, like, a lot of people that are interested in going to law school and end up doing this, it's not like people are bad people, right? It's not like people that are engaged in this type of thing are necessarily evil, because there are a lot of lawsuits that are legitimate. There are a lot of instances where harm was done and someone has a right to property damages, mental and physical language, whatever.
Yep, you
Not
get
saying,
injured by the police, you should be able to sue the police department, and that
yep,
person should no longer be a cop. It's
yep,
pretty easy.
that. Or if you eat a box of macaroni and cheese and it makes you sick because there's some big mold found in it and blah, blah, blah. It was a very obvious problem, on their end.
Right.
Yeah. And an attorney would, blah, blah, blah. Not saying that, fortunately, knock on wood, I don't think that I've ever really had food poisoning. Uh, Hopefully that doesn't fail in the last month of 2020.
Knock
Nothing
on
else.
wood. Knock on wood.
But you have to manage the incentives, right? Because if a kid who's interested in becoming a lawyer knows that he can do something that's more meaningful, maybe more interesting, more whatever, and you know what? I'm not denying that they might take a pay cut, right? I'm not saying that at all. I mean, certainly for the first few years, I think that there is something to be said for kind of a apprenticeship program, you know what I mean? But I think that you can do it in such a manner that you have a relatively consistent supply of people, and then you get these people the real world experience that they need, while also buttressing our system and giving people the const. And here's the thing: we maybe some people don't. You have a constitutional right to an attorney, right? Sure, the part of the Miranda rights came from. Blah 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 blah.
If you're there is a question about whether that's applicable to non-U.S. citizens, but yes, in my opinion, everybody should.
Yep, an action against the government, all that good stuff. That doesn't exist. It's kind of like saying that, and yeah, it's gotten better, but like saying that North Dakota has a medical marijuana program. Like, yeah, they do, but the fees and the limitations and the blahs, it really, I mean, if you live in the middle of nowhere and you have to drive 4 hours to get a arbitrarily limited amount of marijuana for, I don't know, a chronic pain condition, maybe cancer, is that really medical marijuana, or does that incentivize people to go to the black market? Likewise, we can choose whether to incentivize people to become public defendants and follow their hearts. Because have you ever talked to a public defendant, AJ, or even anyone that's considering it? Have you ever done that?
No, I don't have very many lawyer friends. All my friends are still in law school, and they're going into like policy and stuff. None of them are gonna do like actual crime law.
Right on. Well, you know, I've talked to a few over the years, and man, these people are like, you know, they're not doing it for the money. These are like the salt of the earth. You know what I mean? These people are doing the Lord's work, and you can tell that they have a passion for it.
Yeah, and they're overworked. They have too
yeah,
many.
and you just dumping water on what could be a great solution to this massive fire that we have, other than over incarceration, because that's an issue too. But a lot of people, man, and this goes along with bail reform, uh, their public defender is too stressed to miss, maybe they miss something obvious because they have a bunch of cases. Maybe their public defender just doesn't have the time.
What
There's a
public
not,
defender reads a case? Almost all public defenders walk into there without knowing anything about the case.
Yeah, I don't know that in particular, but it's just unreasonable and it's clearly unconstitutional. The current setup, I would argue that it's clearly violating precedent. If it's already kind of a one-sided game because the government is, the government. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like
Right.
even if you live in a small town and you're charged by like a local county, like dang, that's still a few dozen people at the very minimum. You know what I mean?
A few
But
dozen people with a lot more money than you.
yeah, but to make it on literally, it's like playing football on a
Could,
hill.
could I? So here's where I think you're 100% correct that we do over litigate in one thing, and this is in patent law. We 100% over litigate in patent law. Patent trolls, the biggest patent troll out there, the biggest battle of patent trolls is Samsung, Apple, big tech companies that they just threaten to sue people or they sue each other. What was it? It was like 15 years ago now, or 10 years ago. Apple sued Samsung because they said that their corners, that Samsung's round corners were infringing on Apple's round corners patent. There's currently a massive patent lawsuit by Oracle that it's actually being talked about at the Supreme Court because of how influential this patent law is. But they're saying, Oracle is saying that they own the framework to a coding language, and we're talking this will change technology.
This is information.
As it stands. The analogies that come from this court case, hilarious. None of them make any sense. They're all so bad.
Go on. List one.
Oh no! Now you're gonna make me look one up. But one of them was like involving golf, but no one was playing golf. It's the dumbest thing. But this
That's
is like
such a weird analogy. I get
exactly.
it though. It clicks.
It's like they're suing for basically like a framework to this coding language, right? And when you're trying to explain it to judges that are not technologically literate, it's extremely difficult. And also, patents are not designed for modern technology. We need to reform our patent system. Don't get me started on that. But the perfect example of over litigation for me is patent law, and that's where I was thinking about becoming a patent lawyer.
Really?
Yeah. So law schools, you generally apply to law school with pre-law classes and stuff. But to be a patent lawyer, they want people technically competent in the field that they want to be a patent lawyer for. So that way they can understand drawings and make competent technical arguments. So for me, I was like, oh, I'm an engineer. I could be a patent lawyer for like nuclear stuff. I could work with nuclear laws and stuff and argue that this reactor design is patented or file patent paperwork and all that type of stuff. I didn't want to go to law school, but that's beside the point. So that's just an example of over litigation. We're talking about, people suing each other. Let's talk about companies suing each other too, man. That is a perfect example of where the powerful have too much power, right?
A perfect. And the other, I'll say two things, and then we probably, believe me, folks, I'm not done rattling off my list here. But the other thing about the patent issue, really quickly, you know why insulin, for example, is not cheap, even though there wasn't really I think the initial inventor sold the patent of it for like $1. You know what? You know what the core issue of insulin prices are, AJ?
Oh, they're pretty expensive. The main insulin. What was it? Isn't that what's his name? Martin Shkreli? Didn't he do insulin?
He did something like no, I think he did a medicine. I don't know. It's been like 15. It's been like 20 years since 2015. I have no idea. But the reason is because they make a slight adjustment to the formula. And because of that, you know what it is, AJ?
Yeah,
It's a
I
new
think
formula.
it's got to be like eight. It's got to be like 800 or 1,000 per vial now. I think.
Yep. And that's
Yeah,
all due, or largely due, to the fact that they're just twisting the patent rules and artificially limiting the supplies. And
that's
the
right.
other thing,
Uh huh.
what a what a ridiculous amount of monopolization that we have that none of us, I mean, if it's not a monopoly, it's certainly an oligarchy in some of these fields,
It's
right?
an oligopoly. Yeah.
Oligopoly, whatever
Yeah.
you'd like to call it. It is ludicrous. And this gets into one more time. I'll say this, and then I'm done. There's three things. I'm bad at math. That's why I was a poli sci major. It gets at the heart of the fact that we have grown far too accepting of government coming into our lives, and the fact that we have not done anything really to ensure that there's near equitable treatment. Because you know what happens if like you file a real patent and you're like me or you, AJ? You know how it works with the patent
Uh,
office?
it takes forever.
No, other than that, that's interesting too. But the other thing, it's not
Uh,
like it's not like you can go up to the government and be like, hey, this is my patent, they're doing it, here's proof.
nah,
Go
you
after
file
them.
it on you file it online and it takes forever.
Yep. And furthermore, who can afford the really awesome lawyers? The people
Yeah.
that have already made a few
Hmm.
million or $1 billion
Yeah.
off of a stolen product. You know what I mean? If we're the same rules that they keep used to keep
Dude,
that guy from copying their stuff.
don't get me
Ludicrous.
started, man. You're hitting my hot buttons. I completely agree.
All right. Well, since
I
we've this is the one of the rare mutual things. You sound like you had something to say. I'll let you say it, but folks. Don't be touching that dial. More.
don't yeah, don't forget, y'all. I'm not a libertarian. I just happen to agree. Bradley sounded like a progressive by saying he wants equity. That's what I'm talking about.
Hey, man. What can I say? It's 2020. Spooky things happen. So we will be right back after this. Don't touch that dial. We got some music coming your way, and I don't know. Duke's an interesting guy. He'll put something interesting in there. We'll be right back. Now.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Horseshoe Theory. I am AJ Albaaj here with your friend and my co-host, Bradley Foster. We're here on December 3rd, 2020, and we're going to talk about something that I think is very important. Everybody hears about domestic issues. We all talk about stuff that affects us, and that's important. I think that's really important. But at the same time, there's like an entire globe of people out there, and an issue something that happened very recently. I believe it was just last week, like the day after Thanksgiving. It created waves across the world, and that was the assassination, the murder, use whatever term you want, of the top Iranian nuclear scientist. You see this, Bradley?
Yes, I did. How could I miss it? I guess you could say that it really struck me, but
Yeah, it kind of exploded, around the world. Oh no, oh god. But anyways, so to recap for people that may not know about this story, so this Iranian nuclear scientist, Israel calls him the father of their nuclear weapons program. Other people might say he's just a nuclear scientist and that they don't have a weapons program. I'm not going to get into it. The facts are argued about. I don't want to argue about facts besides the ones that we know, which is he was killed. He was killed while he was in his car. They blew up the car, right? And they did this to other nuclear scientists too in the same day. They killed families, right? Horrendous, and it's not the only nuclear scientist to be killed this year or in the past decade. And no one took claim for it. No one's going to claim that they killed an Iranian nuclear scientist. But also, countries are going to deny it. But I don't buy it. This doesn't just happen for no reason, right, Bradley?
yeah, it's not like he was, I mean, unless his neighborhood happened to be in like a biker gang turf war. But other than that, I really don't see how a car explodes in the middle of nowhere. And so, if I'm gathering it, so now that we've addressed that, what do you think's going to come of it, AJ? What do you think of it?
So I'm huge anti-war. I hate armed conflicts. I think they're senseless. I think they make no sense. And the last thing that I think that anyone in the U.S. wants is to go to war with Iran. I just
Mm-hmm.
don't think it makes sense. Israel has been saying that Iran is going to attack them for the past 30 years. And they keep on saying it's going to be in 6 months. And they've been saying that for 30 years. Okay. So I just don't understand why we want to go to war, especially because we are still spending billions of dollars per year in a war that we got into for false reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea to me that some actor out there, and I know this is not confirmed, but we all know there is a state actor out there that is trying to start a war and has been
Absolutely.
for decades. And whether and which state actor it is,
AJ,
I don't know. But Mossad is not sneaky, and they did it to send a message.
can I say one thing, AJ, that I just disagree with you on real quick there?
Sure.
There's a lot of state actors that are interested in this type of sabotage. It is not just one country, unfortunately. It is, I mean, I think that I think I might need more than one hand to think of the people that might have had, that theoretically could have had some role to play in this. It is,
100%. There
but
are
go
a
on.
lot of state actors. No, I'm
You're
not.
good.
I'm not saying that there's only one. In my opinion, there is one large state actor.
It's
But
like Clue. It's like a game of Clue. Which of the seven, folks?
yeah, or if let's say you're betting on who's going to win the Super Bowl at the beginning of the season. Listen, there are a lot of teams that have a chance, but which one's like really the one that probably is going to win the Super Bowl, right? So, you know what I mean? And in this case, it's which one is really trying to like stick a knife to something, okay? And I'm gonna get into why I think that this is terrible for the incoming administration, for the Biden administration. Because personally, I know that right now, I don't whatever Iran's going to do, they're blaming it on Israel. They're not going to do it right now. They're not going to do it right away. They wait, just like they waited when we killed Soleimani back in January. Can you believe that was this year? I just want to take a second there. That was this year.
Oh no,
Like,
dude, this year has been pretty short for a decade.
it's just like remember January, what was it, January 3rd? I'm pretty sure he died. Everyone went, this is World War III, we are done for. And that's not even a top 10 story.
Man, it's kind of like we ordered another World War on Wish, and instead we got another Spanish flu.
Or like ordering a couch on Wayfair and you ended up getting just like one of those tiny couches, like a toy couch. But that this attack on Iran, it's not going to be taken well, and it hasn't been taken well by Iran. But really, what it does, and whatever state actor did this, it's to poison the well of diplomacy moving forward. That's the reason I care about this, is because diplomacy moving forward actually could have had a chance to do something, right? To repair. Guys. I got a degree in nuclear engineering. Okay, the Iran deal wasn't perfect, but it was a win for diplomacy and proving that diplomacy can win worldwide. And so, in my opinion, it's poisoning the well for diplomacy to try and make a comeback. And I just don't see it really happening, at least in the Biden term. And I know Biden really wants to try to come back to the table with similar terms to the Iran deal, but I just don't see that as a realistic possibility in his 4 to 8 years. It doesn't even matter if he has a second term; it's not happening.
No, I'm gonna push back with you a little bit. Although I will say that I think that yeah, they're probably gonna be like, they might demand more, they might blah blah blah, but I don't think that they're gonna retaliate in any significant way. And I actually think that the Iranians will come back to the table, and here's why. From a gambit perspective, if you're like I said, if you're a betting man, if you do something, tensions might escalate. I mean, things are different if Iran strikes a destroyer somewhere in the Middle East. Then things look really, really interesting, right? Like spirally. But
Yes.
you just said it, that the Biden administration, excuse me, is going to come in
and attempt to renegotiate. You know that they're inviting you back to the table. Listen, man, Donald Trump's weird, crazy theories on election fraud. And listen, am I saying that, like, was there people with trying to do some things in limited amounts? Was there misinformation? Was it a weird election? Yeah. Was it enough that it would have swung the election in any feasible amount, even if there were accidents or anything related to that? Or bad luck? Absolutely not. But so you know if you're on that you will be dealing with Joe Biden in a little over a month. Okay? Why would you risk further conflict when you know that you can probably get some pretty sweet concessions if you just talk to them? I think that we're actually going to see a lot. I think that this is a win for Iran. I really do.
So I think that if Iran was one person with, one person in game theory, then yeah, maybe. But this is a country of people, and these leaders are facing political pressure. So here's the thing. I agree that if the heads of states didn't have their own internal politics, like, yes, that would be the way it would work. But Iran has been facing pressure since Trump pulled out that they can't trust Americans, that they can't trust the Western hegemony. This has been a talking point. And Iran has to prove to their people that they're tough on America, right? It's just like the American leadership needs to prove that they're tough on Iran. So when you have to include the political dynamics of Iran, I just don't see it, man. They have no reason to not do anything. That to them is weak to their people that have suffered a lot due to the Western hegemony, right? So that you have to include that in sort of factoring. If the state actors didn't need to worry about their own internal politics, I agree with you. They would probably get some sweet concessions. But one, Biden can't really make concessions, any more concessions than what Obama made, maybe by small margins, because that deal was already hated domestically. And Iran, if they don't do anything, they're going to ask for big concessions. But that's assuming they even come to the table, which I don't see it.
All right. 2 reasons why I disagree with you. First off, I disagreed. I think the political pressure front is not exactly in that way because most people in Iran hate their own government. So that's something to think about. There's always protests against, you know what I mean? It was part of the, it was part of the Arabian Spring way back when, before that was just what kind of led to ISIS. But the other thing, other than the Iranian government's unpopularity, which, like I said, I don't really think that you can overstate it. They're having Hong Kong-style protests all over the country at various times. It hasn't been a one-time thing. Is that Iran knows that America is posturing with this. Iran knows it. And they know if they strike back, I mean, Iran has plans. Yeah, I'm sure that they have, they've been training for a while. But you fundamentally know that you're going to get crushed. There is no way that even a limited engagement with Iran goes well. Because like you said, there's a lot of state actors that maybe wouldn't see it as a so limited engagement. And between Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States, and I think that those countries would easily, Israel and Saudi Arabia would, at least they would use our military stuff kind of in a thing by our military. It would be a nightmare for Iran. They know that they're out of power if that happens, because, or at the very least, their lives are going to be in open danger. So I think that really it makes, I mean, and I don't think that they want to be a international recluse like North Korea either. The reason I say that is, do you know what Iran has? Oil! They have a crap ton of oil. It's the reasons why the Russians and British split it up 100 or so years ago. What's killing them is the fact that they can't sell their oil. If they go and start killing Americans, especially if they do something and kill dozens or hundreds, boy, it's looking like you might not be selling oil for a while. And they know that, They know that that's, it's It would be like, I mean, North Dakotans, it would be like, shutting off your oil supply to all but one or two buyers. It would no longer be all frocking on the Bakken.
So, I understand what you're saying, but I am going to completely disagree with you on the political pressure in Iran. Listen, I know that we're here in America and that Western media will show protests happening in Iran and be like, "Oh, is there change happening in the country?" And it's like, no, this change is happening for the worse for America, 100%. And the reason why I know why is because their elections have results, and the elections have actually had more conservative, more anti-American elections. They're winning, and they have a pretty big majority. And their new parliamentary speaker has said that negotiations and compromise are useless and harmful. So I just really don't see. You speak of there's political pressure against the Iranian government. I completely disagree. I don't see it.
Well,
And I believe that the political pressure is actually one to be more conservative and more anti-American. And each thing that we do to poke the bear makes it more anti-American. I'm not going to get into discussions about whether we would wipe Iran off the face of the earth, because I hate war, and we didn't even do that for Iraq or Afghanistan, right? We just destabilized the
Nope.
region.
No,
We
no,
made
no.
the region worse overall, and we have sunk trillions of dollars that should have been spent improving things here domestically to do what? To do what? Create ISIS? To give the Taliban more power? Come on.
You're right, but the one thing I'll disagree with you on, man, we faced trouble from guerrilla groups and all that, but it sure wasn't Saddam Hussein's army that we were dealing with for very long, either time. I think that we could knock them out, and I think they know that. And here's the other thing that I think is really, really important.
We've already toppled an Iranian government, and how did that work out? Come on, man.
No, I agree with you. It would be horrible. It would be horrible, but that is just the thing. It would be a horrible reaction if America invaded, bombed, toppled. I'm as anti-war as they come. All right? I think that it's just horrendous what we've done. I think that we need to bring the damn troops home, and that's how we support our troops. Bring them home to their families. But the big thing is that, boy, we sure went in and knocked them down right the first time. But yeah, I agree with you. It is just, it's definitely not a good situation. But the really key thing that I'm going to disagree with you on is it's not like they're even like a constitutional monarchy. The guy that has a lot of lever is, of course, the Ayatollah. And, he hasn't attacked yet. So the fact that, I mean?
He did attack a U.S. base, though, this year.
A limited thing, yeah, but that was with Trump. I just don't know if they have they have a lot to lose if they do, in fact. Now, granted, there is the argument to be made that it distracts their people from it. But I think that they have more to gain. If they do anything, I think that they turn to like a North Korea style, where they rabble-rouse, maybe fire off a couple rockets, and then return to the table. Because, hey, North Korea, without anything really, I mean, they have some mines, but that's about it in North Korea, right? It's not like they're sitting on literally billions of dollars, trillions of dollars of oil.
Right.
But
they are next to a strategic U.S. ally in South Korea, though.
That is also true. But that has been their sole existence. But Iran does have that benefit. So I don't know. I just don't know if you commit to a more aggressive tone to the U.S. until you get at least like a month into the Biden administration, Maybe say some things, maybe get riled up, but I think that they're going to at least look at the room, They're going to at least think about going in, and I think that wins out. Even if they don't sit down at the table and commit, I think that there's an opportunity for the Biden administration to at least pull the chair out for them and, I don't know, get them, you know what I mean? Get them next to the table.
I don't see it, man. When the Iran deal passed in 2015, a bunch of Republican senators actually wrote a letter to Iran to not enter the treaty, to not enter the deal, because the next Republican president would just leave the deal. And that's what happened. I just don't see why Iran. If I'm Iran, which I'm not Iran, but if I was, it's hard for me to go, hey, you know what? I should deal with the people that stabbed me in the back 5 years ago. Oh, and by the way, that person who made all of those concessions, that person is no longer in power. So he made those concessions. They pulled out of the deal. He lost his power. Why would I come to the table? Why would I even come to the table instead of just showing that I'm strong and I can ignore the Western hegemony, Western imperialism, whatever they want to say, right? You have to, the politics at home to them is they are being a strong leader by telling the U.S. to go screw themselves.
That's the image. I get that. I think that there is something to be said for that. But
It's just what it's a Trump is popular on Iran with certain segments because he tells Iran to go screw themselves or to come get some, right?
that being said, though, the one thing that I will say that's working in Iran's favor, and they have to know this too, is that it's part of the reason that Trump got elected, right? Is because he's like, hey, we're going to end these pointless wars. We're going to end these forever wars. I do think that there is a legitimate thirst in the GOP for less war, not more. So,
I don't think it's a thirst in the GOP. I think that there is a vocal minority within the GOP that wants less war. But we're talking about America's political leaders, just like there is a vocal minority within Democrats that don't want war. However, you and I both know that if it came to war, that Democrats and Republicans would cross the aisle to go to war, right?
which is
we
exactly
both know that.
which Iran knows that too, which gives them another reason. Like I said, could it ultimately happen? Yeah, but I think that this is something we're going to be dealing with in February to May instead of in the next month or so, or in the next couple of months. Will the Biden administration nail it? I'm not thrilled. I'm not thrilled about his history. I'm not thrilled about his cabinet picks. I'm not thrilled about any of that.
That's what I was about to say. You've seen his cabinet picks, right?
Yep.
They're as war hawk as it comes, man. Michelle Flournoy. I can't believe. It's disgusting. It's disgusting that they're gonna pick her, and it's like, oh yeah, she's gonna bring radical new thinking. Like, yeah, torture's okay again.
Hey, everybody. All I'm saying, that is a pretty strong argument for wasting your vote from time to time. Let's go third party, baby.
That's what I'm fully behind that, depending on how terrible the candidates are. Yeah, I'm fully behind that.
Waste your damned vote. But like I said, I'm not thrilled about it, but I certainly don't think that we're going to be, I certainly don't think that Iran isn't at least interested in dipping their toes in the water.
I don't think we're going to go to war. I really don't. I think with a Biden administration, that war is such a small probability. But do I think that diplomacy is not on the table for 4 years? Yeah. Which to me is a loss. It's not going to war loss, but it is a loss that is significant. And I think that we should recognize that, one, if you're a former Obama official crying foul that whoever did this shouldn't have done this, you need to shut your mouth because Obama killed tons of scientists and killed tons of people in clandestine operations, so you don't need to talk about it. and secondly, like, it just shows that, no matter how vocal a minority is that does not want war, there is still a significant portion of the electorate or the officials, whoever, that wants blood, that wants war, that wants money to go to Lockheed Martin, that wants money to go to Boeing, instead of going to your schools, instead of going to your healthcare, instead of taking care of the citizens.
That is, I mean, we can talk about what taking care of the citizens looks like, but what I will say is always true. No matter who runs in an election, Boeing always wins. Boeing wins every election. That's just a fact.
Yeah, defense contractors. Yep.
Yeah,
and Boeing is basically a state-subsidized monopoly, but that's for another day. Another take.
I think that we both came in here and you're getting. I wanted to start yelling with you on that one, AJ. I hear you. It is. It's definitely the whole military-industrial complex is a really. It's not uniquely American, but boy, it is a damn shame that one of this country's biggest exports is death and needless violence. And
and toppled democracies and toppled
And terror.
dictatorships. Yep.
And chaos. And here's the thing: do I think that the Iranian government is good? No. Would I even
No,
consider
I'm
them a
not. I'm
legitimate
not saying
government?
that.
Would I consider them a legitimate government if I was in Iran? Probably no. I probably would have dipped to a certain extent, given what they do to people there. But do I think that it's better than what happened to Iraq? Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. Saddam Hussein was nuts. Saddam Hussein was crazy.
He protected Christians.
But I don't want to talk about what Saddam did to Christians after what he did to the Kurds. But you know what was true about Saddam? And he was crazy in his own right, but he knew when he was beat. All right? Saddam wasn't an absolute idiot. And you know the other thing about Saddam? You knew who the hell Saddam was. You don't know what's going to come out of Iraq. You might not know what's going to come out of Afghanistan. Or for that matter, Somalia. Or for that matter, Libya. Or for that matter, Yemen. It's... I mean...
That's a whole nother podcast there, man.
Oofda. The military-industrial complex, oofda. But, yeah, I think...
With that, I think we should sign off before we keep on talking about how much we hate the Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and all those defense contractors making tons of money.
We absolutely should. All right, well, we'll discuss the blood money in another episode. Thanks for tuning in one more time. This has been, of course, the greatest 88.1 FM Fargo out of Fargo Moorhead. This is the Horseshoe Theory. I am one half of the team, Bradley Foster, along with...
And I'm AJ. Take care, everyone. Stay safe. Wear a mask.